Hi, and welcome back to This Week in Voice, Season 5, Episode 3. My name is Bradley Metrock. I'm CEO of a company called Score Publishing based in Nashville, Tennessee. We're thrilled to have a fantastic panel for a really interesting set of stories today. And I'm going to introduce all three of them, yield the floor to them, let them introduce themselves. Trish Scanlon, how are you?
I'm very good, Bradley. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you for being here. So take a moment, tell us who you are, tell us who you're with, tell us what you do.
Okay, my name is Patricia Scanlon. I'm the founder and CEO of Soapbox Labs. So we are voice tech for kids. We have built our own proprietary technology built from the ground up over the last 7 years, specifically for children. For children's voices, behaviors, and language that vary wildly from adults, as you can imagine, and a lot of people would have experienced. So systems have been built for adults, modeled for adults' voices and behaviors and language don't tend to work very well for kids. So that's why we have brought our product to market and spent considerable amount of time doing that. And what we do is license our technology to clients who build the end user product for children, right? So that's across education, literacy and language learning, as well as in entertainment, toys, robotics. So my own background, I'm an engineer actually. I have a PhD in speech recognition, and I've been in the area of AI and speech recognition for over 20 years now. And that's it. I'm looking forward to taking part. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate you. Next up is Julia Liberty of AI Data Innovations. Julia, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. So take a minute, tell us who you are, tell us who you're with, tell us what you do.
All right. Julia Liberty, I work with AI Data Innovations. We're actually on the data providing side. So our company, we've been in the data space for about 10 years, and we focus on providing and collecting data for AI. We highly focus on multi-language, multi-market models, a lot of security work that we're doing, especially with sensitive data, and since security and data regulations are becoming stricter. I have a background in linguistics and part of the business development plan, and have been with the company for about 2 years, worked for a different AI company in Germany before that.
Excellent. Thank you for being here. Next up is Dr. Alvelda. Dr. Say Phil or Phillip?
Phillip is fine, yeah.
Thank you for being here. Take a minute, tell us who you are, tell us who you're with, tell us what you do.
Got it. My name is Phillip Alvelden. I'm the CEO of a company called Brainworks, where we took technology that came out of the DARPA brain-machine interface world to translate some of the new discoveries in neuroscience into more capable AI systems. And our first series of products is actually in the health tech sector. It was kind of a happy accident that we were in a good position to contribute to the COVID efforts in systems that will do vital sign analysis and direct measurement through cell phone cameras using kind of the rush of blood across your face. And now we're in the process of deploying systems and services and testing software and management for schools. I'm one of the old guys in AI. I've been in it since about, I want to say 1987, when we were working at NASA to build computers that worked more like human brains in kind of the second renaissance of neural networks. Then did my PhD at MIT in the artificial intelligence lab. And then began building companies in Silicon Valley, and about 5 years ago went to DARPA to help create the brain-machine interface industry, and that's of course what led to Brainworks. So great to be here and talk about something that I think is super important and near and dear to my heart.
Thank you very much for being here as well. Appreciate all three of y'all. With that, we'll get to the news. So story number one from MacRumors: Apple acquires AI startup Vilynx, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that completely wrong, to improve Siri. So this is one of two stories that we're starting with Apple. So this has to be, I don't think it's a This Week in Voice first. I think we had two Apple stories really early on back in season one day. but it's been a while. So Apple, thanks for doing enough to where we can have two stories on you now in one particular week. Phillip, I'm going to start with you for this, and then I'll go to Trish, and then go to Julia. You know, we've seen Apple attempt to acquire its way back to where it feels like it ought to be with Siri, with AI and machine learning. What are your thoughts on this particular article, this acquisition, and what are your thoughts on Apple and Siri in general? And you're on mute, by the way.
Much easier to be heard when that's off. I think the real story, of course, is that trying to find information that's accessible to computer systems that's buried in rich and complex data of all different types is really hard. And I think the dream of Siri was always that, you know, all of this data and all of this knowledge and information would be at your fingertips, or at the tip of your tongue in this case. But it just proved hard. And the early efforts were so constrained by, you know, just the simplicity of what you could access. And so I think this acquisition points to like a desperate thirst to make those services richer. And, you know, the fact that Apple is willing to spend to improve is I think, a good testament to the importance of this area.
Yeah, agreed. And Trish, I'm going to ask you the same thing. You know, what particularly jumped out to you about this, if anything, and just your overall thoughts about Apple and Siri at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, you know, Siri is obviously the first voice tech one that kind of broke open the area and made us all, you know, aware of speech recognition in our personal devices as well. And they continue to invest quite broadly. Arguably, some of the others have taken them over since then, like Google and Amazon in terms of accuracy, but they're definitely not giving up that and investing quite deeply. I think this one's interesting because I think there's a lot to do with their investments in Apple TV and making their own content. And if you're going to go up against Netflix, you have to be able to make your content searchable. So when you start creating vast amounts of content, you know, being able to parse video, so that's the video processing as well as the audio speech processing, to be able to automatically create these metadata tags that are searchable. And then that can speak more broadly to, you know, their efforts in search in general, because more and more of the content online is video and audio. It's not text. It's not just text anymore. We're seeing that more and more. So being able to you know, efficiently and accurately parse for good metadata tags will make your search and your recommendations more accurate and more personal, right? So it'll make that experience better. So when they're serving you content into the future, they're serving you something that you're interested in. So I think that's an interesting one. I think they continue to acquire small companies on a regular basis, a lot under the radar. Some we talk about, some we don't know about. But yeah, it's definitely a strategy of Apple, along with the other guys, to continue to acquire, particularly in the space of AI, in order to augment their expertise and their knowledge. And you know, we see them branching out quite broadly in this, and not a surprise. It's a good one, though. I like this. I think it makes sense.
Excellent. And if there's somebody who knows about data and tagging, it's Julia. Julia, your thoughts as you look at this, anything in particular stand out? What do you think?
Yeah, actually, I think it's also a very exciting move. I mean, Apple has acquired a lot of smaller startups in the past. And if that is the way and the road for them to improve, especially services like their Apple TV, I think that's exciting. I mean, there's Netflix out there, as Trish already mentioned, and it's ginormous to go against Netflix and that content. So if you find something that might help you improve that spectra of that, even if it's acquiring a new startup, I think that's a good start. So why not improve something that you have with the help of a company that has an expertise in it and that focuses on exactly that. I think that it's not necessarily just about the Apple TV, but also maybe to use on some of the applications that they have on the new iOS. And in terms of the Siri speech engine, I think a lot of people talk about that it's not very accurate, but over the last couple of years and months, actually, it has improved drastically. So from not having the accuracy level that some other speech engines maybe have. I think Siri has come a really long way and has improved drastically.
That's what people tell me, but every time I ask Siri to do something, she kind of struggles. No, she has, in all seriousness, obviously, and I say she, I'm making somebody mad by doing that. Siri has definitely improved, and I also like that. So I'm a big NFL fan, and I watch my Tennessee Titans every Sunday, and every Sunday, like clockwork, lately I've been seeing Siri ads. So Apple's been advertising pretty heavily, and they'll go on there and so they'll say, ask Siri for standings or the score of a particular game, and just promoting it, and all of it's good to see. So I completely agree. And this story ties directly into the next one. So I'm going to go ahead and read that headline here. This is from TechCrunch. Apple search crawler activity could signal a Google competitor or a bid to make Siri a one-stop shop. And so this is just as much an Apple story as it is a Google story. And Trish, I'm going to start with you, and then Julia, and then Phillip. Trish, your thoughts on the article, first of all, and then your thoughts on if Apple could actually compete, how you would handicap an Apple versus Google search engine battle of behemoths.
So this was really interesting because, it comes on the back of the recent discoveries for most people, the billions that have been spent by Google to underpin all of Apple's search across their platform. And that was a recent enough, story that went mainstream. So on the back of this is really interesting, right? So first of all, you got Google paying Apple billions and a multi-year deal to be their search engine. Then you get this story saying, oh, now Apple is investing in their own crawler activity, could signal their intention to compete. So my first reaction was, nah, that's not Apple's game. Apple sell devices, it's our ecosystem, it's different. Google make money from search ads and it's their predominant revenue. Apple have never really gone after ads space. So I don't know about this. And then I started reading a lot more about it and I got really interested in this. And then it changed for me because I think Google have the advantage here. They have a decade and a half or more on developing, search, right? So it's 2 decades probably at this point. Apple have never been in that space, but Apple have the means to invest in whatever they want. They have the people, they have the experts, and they have the means to do this. So when I started looking at it more, it would seem that Apple's view tend to be always to lock people into their ecosystem, right? That's the value. That's why you can, you don't get third-party stuff on the iPhone, the Apple, the iPhone. That's what frustrates us a lot of the time. We're not talking about a skills ecosystem like Apple or Amazon or Google, but maybe this push into search is warranted and makes sense because Apple really have been talking a lot about privacy, and that really is their differentiator when it comes to voice. And a lot of people would argue some of Siri's disadvantages compared to their competitors is that they try and maintain the privacy. So any voice that leaves the device doesn't actually have personally identifiable information associated with it. So if that was the case, for privacy-minded people, staying inside the Apple ecosystem and having search associated with that, but they actually you can choose to let them have access to your email and your calendars and all this, and they can serve you more relevant search items rather than always having to go to Google and letting Google have access to that data. They don't need Google's money. They don't need the billions. They've got their own. I actually think this is something. Initially I said no, but yeah, very possible. This we should pay attention to.
Excellent. And Julian, I'm going to ask you the same question. Your thoughts on the article. Do you agree with Trish's enthusiasm about this, handicapping Apple versus Google in the search space?
Yeah, actually, I do. I'm also excited about it. When we talk about Apple, the ecosystem, if they really go into search, it's an ecosystem that they, once again, can close just to Apple users. And there's a lot of privacy issues. Google, I mean, obviously under investigation and in a non-compete way, but also the idea of privacy, of not having all the ads on Google and Google getting all your data is definitely an exciting thing. And users are more and more concerned about privacy. But the other thing with Apple also, because it is in the ecosystem and Apple and Siri have access to your emails, to your apps, and can see everything, it's also a more personalized experience. So besides the privacy aspect, I think one of the things that is exciting, especially for Apple users, is that the experience of search is a lot more personalized. So the content, as Trish mentioned, is a lot more relevant to the people. And I think that's an exciting step. And like she said, they don't need the money from Google, the billions that they get. What is really valuable to Google, on the other hand, is of course the Apple user, because the Apple user, there's a lot of insights that they get. But for Apple, it's not necessary. Plus, it also pushes them in the direction that they can have personalized ad, push their own app store, push their own services if they use a search platform. And I don't think we should forget that Apple has a huge brand loyalty. So I think that even though Google obviously is a search engine that is preferred by, I think it's 95% of users or 90%, Apple has a big brand loyalty. So I think that there could also be a lot of users that think, hey, I have my Apple Watch, I have my iPhone, I have my iPad, my Mac. Let's just close the ecosystem and I will use their search engine. Feel more comfortable with it because they have a longer history of product relationship with that as well.
Completely agree. And Phillip, I'm going to ask you the same thing. So Trish and Julia, enthusiastic about this, want to see if you agree. Anything else jump out at you from the piece? Handicapping it, Apple versus Google in the search space.
Yeah, it's a great conundrum. I think I'd observe that Apple is in kind of a delicate position right now because they are under some scrutiny about their trade practices around the App Store and their monopoly power, and the type of moves that they've been kind of resisting for years and kind of grudgingly adopted over the last months has been to allow you to change what is the default browser and email program on your phone. But I think that anyone that's been in the industry for some time knows that whatever that default is what 90% of people use. And, a few of us power users might pick our favorite alternative. But as far as the market at large, the default still carries the day. So Apple has a tremendous amount of leverage in, what are the defaults there and where does the search traffic go? I think you can pull out a couple of interesting tidbits if you kind of read between the lines of the announcement, where clearly Google thinks that paying Apple billions of dollars will give them a handsome return on their investment in the search market. So it's clear that to Google that that search exclusivity is worth what, tens of billion, $14 billion versus their $1 billion level of investment. I mean, I'm just applying their PE of the day. So I think you could kind of infer from their profitability what that likely relationship is. So I think that for Google, I understand why they would pay $1 billion to get that many billions in return in search revenues from ads. Not sure what Apple gets, and I think this is the kind of the root of the interesting question. They are clearly playing to maneuver against Google. One of the things that they've toyed with in the last few releases of the browser has been adding features to block ads. Okay, well, that would disintermediate the revenue that Google paid for. So it wouldn't surprise me if they're having a conversation that says, if you put the ad blocker in your browser, we're not going to pay you $1 billion for ads that we don't get. So I think that that's probably part of the dynamic that's behind the curtains, if you will. But and the ad blocker feature has kind of come and gone, and it's been default on, and now it's not. And so you can kind of see that playing out in kind of the search bar wars, if you will. But I think either Patricia or Julia made a good point earlier that Apple has staked its brand around the idea of not selling your information, of preserving and holding your privacy as paramount. Well, if that's the case, they can't monetize those ads the same way that Google is. And so I'm not really sure what they're getting out of. And I think that's the thing we need to figure out to really understand what their motives are and why they might be driving in that direction.
Yeah, no, that's all of that's really good commentary, and I don't know. I echo a little bit of what all three of you have said. I'm enthusiastic. I try to look for things to be enthusiastic about Apple about now that I'm pretty much out of the ecosystem. I've got my Samsung phone here, but I'm doing this on my MacBook Pro, which they finally gave us a MacBook Pro with keys that work. So thank you for that. The thing that sticks out in my mind is the dalliance, Apple's dalliance with the self-driving car. So we've been hearing about Apple in this autonomous car for, I mean, probably at least the last 5 years, and Apple's developing a self-driving car and oh, they're close, and no, not that close. Oh, they're close again. Oh no, they're not that close. So, and I just and I look at the rest of Apple's ecosystem and I think, where has the innovation been exactly? And that's not who Tim Cook is, and we knew that. When Steve Jobs died, a lot died with him. But I wonder how much of this is an Apple identity crisis continuing to unfold, where they really don't know what is next. Maybe services is next, and yeah, they generated some revenue, but really that's just on the back of the iPhone install base. Autonomous car is next. Well, maybe not. Search is next. Well, we'll see. So I don't know. Call me cautiously optimistic. Any closing thoughts on this?
I think Google have been, the ones who have more often than any of them, like, started out efforts and shut them down unashamedly. And I think that's innovation, right? I think it's okay. Like, the people may try things, they may not succeed. Google Pay, took many years to get going, a lot of false starts, big bets, a lot of false starts. And I think in Apple's case, I think they are constantly revising strategy, just like everybody else. So will this actually come to fruition? I mean, nobody has been able to take on Google in terms of search, to the same effect. So, it's worth investing in. They stand to gain a lot by shutting out Google. Will they pull it off? Like you're saying with the self-driving cars, there's nothing assured here. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It's all about your strategy, the people you bring in or move into the space, your approach, the big thinking about it. Are you trying to solve a quick problem, or are you going for going in this for the long haul? Like, I think a lot of those decisions that big companies make are key, and the people are key to their success, right? So, there's nothing assured, no matter how much money you have.
Well said.
Yeah. And Bradley, I would say, you touched on a key point in my mind, which is that the iPhone and the cell phone penetration of the market has saturated. And so they cannot see the growth that they have over the last 10 years, again, through the hardware market on the phone side. And they don't have another product that's growing at anything like the rate that grew. So, in order to deliver growth, they've been forced to switch to, being a service company. And, they've done everything they can to increase the services revenue, and you see things like the bundling effort with their new One service. I think that there aren't too many industries that you could point to say, if we caught a meaningful piece of that industry, would it move the needle for $1 trillion company? Search happens to be one of them. So I think it's a logical reach for them at this point to say, all right, we're services. What other services do we want to do? There you go. Search is kind of at the top of the list.
Yeah, well said. Julia, your closing thoughts, and we'll move on.
Sure. Actually, I think Philip made a very valid point there. But I think one thing that we have to take into consideration is the antitrust suit that is going on against Google. So right now is actually a perfect time. If someone wants to invest in search, this is the right time. And the deal between Google and Apple is part of that lawsuit, or at least separately investigated. So it's a good time, because that could be the point where Google might be in a somewhat vulnerable spot. So this is actually a good opportunity for someone that wants to invest into search and that usually focuses on hardware rather than services. That's a good time for it.
So wait, so are you suggesting there might be some collusion between Google and Apple that
No, not at all.
that Sundar just gave Tim Cook a call and said, "Hey man, help me out with the antitrust issues. Can you just start a search engine effort so we can point to that and not suffer the slings and arrows of federal oppression?"
Nope, merely pointing out it's a good time right now.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great commentary all the way around, and we will leave that right there. And of course, we'll keep an eye on both of those. Story number 3 from Adobe: voice technology's role in our rapidly changing world. So this is an article written by Mark Webster, who started SaySpring, which was acquired by Adobe. He's head of product for Adobe's voice efforts, and Adobe just came out with a big new report, which we'll be talking about tonight on This Week in Voice VIP, as well as some excerpts from the show that we're recording right now. There's a lot to this, and Julie, I'm going to start with you, and then Phillip, and then Trish. What, if anything, in particular jumped out to you from this report? Well, I'll just leave it at that. What, if anything, jumped out? What are your thoughts?
Sure. So number one, obviously very interesting article, especially looking at it from the data perspective, because I think one of the issues was that users are complaining about accuracy levels, which always plays into our corner. Accuracy is definitely a very important point. And if voice is moving forward as fast as it is this year, there are a lot of holes that need to be filled. For example, having biased speech engines, or not really understanding what a specific person wants to communicate. I think one of the things that I found very interesting is that the usage of voice compared to last year has increased rapidly, but the accuracy level actually did not match up to what the report showed last year in 2019. So I think there's a big gap that can be shown between what users want, and they are more open to using the voice experience, but that the technology or the data isn't catching up as fast as it should. So for example, let's take the banking. Usually there's a lot of casual uses for voice assistant in banking, or booking a doctor's appointment has become something that people want to do now. And because it's a broad field and there's a lot that needs to be taken into consideration when building exactly that interface, I think there's a miss of having the right language, that the speech engine actually understands exactly what you're asking for, because you, for example, might ask something differently than I would. So I think there's a lot of training that still needs to be done, but I agree, it's really exciting. And I think voice is important and should move forward with a lot of other applications that are not just casual, like listening to music or getting directions. And especially now looking at the COVID pandemic, a lot of people think it's a sanitary solution to use voice, which I agree. For example, opening an elevator or opening a door, it's a lot easier, and it just shows how important voice is, and that voice is actually one of our, well, in this case, sanitary and very important tools that we have and should make use of.
Excellent. Phillip, same question to you. Wide-ranging report from Adobe. The piece speaks to it. What jumped out at you?
Well, to me, I think what jumped out at me most is what wasn't there. And I think that, everyone on this call thinks, and agrees that voice is a critical, interaction mode for getting information. You ask for something and you get it back. It's important for controlling things, opening a door, commanding a navigation system. But to me, those are still very, very simple, parse a few words, figure an intent, execute a command. It's a very simple chain of logic. And I think that when people write articles like these, they're thinking in kind of a narrow mode, just of what's familiar to them. What can I expect a machine to do for me right now? And so I think from a first perspective, I like to look at things a little bit deeper. So thinking about voice technology, not just as word recognition and mapping a specific, unitary control or response to it, but think of it as exposing deeper meaning. The issue of voice recognition, that's only the first step in figuring out how to have a rich interaction with an artificial system. What can that embody? What does it mean? Does Siri understand some underlying meaning or truths about the universe when it answers your question? Absolutely not. It's almost like a lookup table and a command response. That's kind of the state of the technology right now. So unless we can build some of the more human brain-like underpinnings that will embody meaning and representation, it's going to be very hard to make these things more sophisticated, to have richer conversations that involve different issues. I'll give you an example. So today, AI in healthcare is very, very narrowly focused on individual unitary problems. Can you see in the X-ray evidence of COVID-19? Okay. Can we look at an echocardiogram trace and detect whether or not you have some heart involvement that would indicate the virus? So those are very narrow problems. But if you say, what should my treatment be and what can I afford? Now, all of a sudden, you've got ethics, economics, all of these other issues in the decision-making process for your medical treatment that a doctor can represent, and we take that for granted. And the AI tools, they're not even in the picture right now. So our efforts to figure out, what is the underlying machinery of cognition underneath the words and what they represent and what they mean, that to me is kind of the brass ring that if anyone can reach a little closer to it, we could make tremendous advances in what these voice systems are capable of. So that's kind of a good mom and pop apple pie AI greatness kind of statement. But there's one other thing that I realized wasn't there. And in this COVID world, it turns out that diagnosing the disease is really important. And it turns out that I think that beyond identifying the words themselves and trying to figure out, what are you asking a machine to do, we can actually determine a lot about your health in how you speak. The tone of your voice, the spacing of your words, even your word choice and frequency, they all encode information about your health. And the more you use these things, even things like how do you word your emails changes when you're sick. So these are the types of things that we think are very, very powerful indicators or biomarkers of health. And I think that the voice technology mavens are only beginning to head in that direction. And there's a lot of fertile ground for exploration and impact in that direction.
Complete agreement. Excellent. Yeah. And Trish, I want to get your thoughts as well. So a lot of moving parts to this piece. You've heard Julia and Philip's perspective on it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I agree with Philip. I actually think, what voice technology does today in the world is actually very brittle. It's not that it can understand meaning and intent. It can't. We've a long way to go. We've been at this for 50 years, but like in terms of actually beyond understanding acoustically what was said, and a little bit of language modeling, we have a massive amount of work to do on the process and understanding and intent and things like that to do. But conversely, when I look at this, I think voice technology today is so accurate and it can do so many things, but it doesn't exist almost outside of Alexa and Siri and Google. So if I don't have my phone or my smart assistant, or I'm in a place where, my car, where it actually, we don't see voice, even though it's accurate enough to be. So the way I always look at it is that voice is the natural interface between humans. We've only had to invent buttons and dials and keyboards and mouse, swipe, touch, everything, because voice wasn't accurate enough to be able to communicate with machines, right? Until very recently. So a lot of what these users are looking for and what they're asking for, like let's say in terms of sanitary, visit an event, wouldn't be great if it opened a door. That doesn't need to be Google or Siri or Alexa. It can be an independent voice command that just triggers and opens the door. Imagine what that would do for accessibility for people in wheelchairs or people who don't have the same mobility. What I'd like to see, and I kind of almost in a response to reading what the people want, and I totally agree with you guys as well, though, that people are only going to answer what it's in the realm of thinking is possible. But we don't even see that yet. Like, I mean, what I'd love to see is, what we often talk about with kids is that an interface technology is something that can allow a kid who's pre-literate, doesn't have to read a button or a complex menu system, can actually use their voice to get to what they want. And wow, they can suddenly interact with technology in a very seamless way, in an invisible way. Because voice, being the natural interface, should be invisible. It should fall away, right? It shouldn't be this, hey Siri, hey Alexa, whatever. It just should be something that we use instead of buttons and swipes and touches. And we're getting to a point where it's accurate enough and it can handle background noise and can handle independent speakers it's never heard before, people with a heavy accent. And what we see a lot is inaccessibility in education, in just allowing children to interface with a toy and have a conversation without a screen. There's so many things voice can do. And I think a lot of times it's been great that voice assistants have broken open the market and allowed it to normalize, using your voice to normalize in society, as people are saying there, that they're in that article that, they feel kind of, comfortable or not comfortable depending on your age. But what we need to get to a point where people understand that voice technology has potential outside of an assistant. This is an interface technology. And once we start thinking about it like that, so much more is possible. And you begin to see, we're only at the tip of the iceberg here. There's so much more, whether it's in health, whether it's in education, whether it's in toys, robotics, accessibility. There's so much more. And I like the idea of the potential. And I love the idea that people simply think it could help in a sanitary circumstance, but it can do so much more.
Excellent. So y'all covered a lot of ground with your answers there. So Julie, you were talking about it. There's a delta between where the accuracy is and where it needs to be, that needs to be shored up. Phillip, you were talking about the deficit between where things are today, meaning wise, a lack of a need to continue to pursue systems that understand you as well as the world in a deeper way. And then Trish, you reflecting on the fact that these assistants are all tied to mainstream ecosystems, and it would be nice to have broader surface area to voice than that. And that's really interesting that all three of you would mention different things. I think that, to me, looking at the piece, and I've seen the underlying report that it was based off of, which I'm not sure, I couldn't tell from the report if they're making that report available or not. That's why I didn't email it out. But I think what I take away from it is that, we've all lived through the initial, like 2017, 2018 with Alexa, and everybody asking in the media pontificating, what's the killer app? So what's the killer app? Because that's the only word I know, because we just went through apps for the last 10 years. So what's the killer app? And you hear these crickets chirping. You don't hear an answer. You can call out the question, but you don't get an answer. And I think what we have come to figure out is that for many situations, voice itself is the killer app for many different contexts of computing. And then, within different verticals, different industries, different sectors, such as healthcare, that's a perfect example. There's a totally different spectrum of ways to answer, or even begin to start to answer what the killer app is. And when I look at a report like what Adobe put together, I hear y'all's responses, there's this yearning for more, across everybody working in this space. There's this yearning for more. We've had our first, it's like a baby, it's like, you have your first bite of some sort of food and you want more, it's like, that's where we're at. And we want more context, and we want more meaning, and we want more availability, and we want more accuracy and all of that. And so I'm encouraged when I read things like this. I think that when we look back at 2020, we're going to see a year that was transformative and accelerating to everything that all of us are doing with voice and AI opens up everybody's eyes, gets everybody, you know, I've seen it in many other areas of our business, people who were sitting on the fence, you know, Fortune 1000 companies saying, yeah, you know, the voice conversational AI stuff is nice, but, you know, it's down the roadmap a bit. We'll get to it when we get to it. You know, that's a pre-COVID conversation. I heard that several times. I don't hear that anymore. I haven't heard that in a long time. And what I hear instead is it's investing resources time, and it's getting into the ball game time. And so I think everything that y'all said, everything in the article reflects that. Any closing thoughts?
Well, my old advisor at MIT, Marvin Minsky, was famously quoted as saying, you know, no one's ever built a computer that understood what it was doing. And then but what's not as widely published is that a moment later, he like turned to the rest of us in the room and said, but most of the time we don't either. and so I think that, you know, what I would take is a little bit of encouragement that, you know, we are building, you know, progressively larger portions of, you know, the human brain equivalent, right? And as we add each little piece of the new, more capable brains, they can do more complicated things. So, you know, every year now we're seeing, you know, more and more capability, more and more understanding. And there's a few developments that I think could really accelerate that with a few key technology leverage points that I'm looking keenly at. But I think it's a great time to be in the field. There's tremendous resources being poured behind it. The Apple acquisition and investments is clearly an indicator. They're not alone. Wouldn't surprise me if a number of the larger companies start to swoop up and purchase distressed AI companies in you know, that are otherwise oppressed by the pandemic. But you know, keep your eyes open. Good time to be in the field.
Yeah, you must be reading my mind. I'm actually working on a piece about that very topic now, because yeah, I completely agree. I think one of the traits we've seen. I talk a bunch about a duopoly, how we're seeing a true duopoly between Amazon and Google, and one of the defining characteristics of a duopoly is increased marketing and increased competitiveness. But another one is acquisitions. So what I completely concur. Julie and Trish, y'all good? You got anything else to throw in there?
I think actually just to comment on what you were saying there about how things have changed. I mean, we've been at Voice Tech for Kids since 2013, and we spent a number of years educating the market, but you know, on why it would be good in education, why would kids need it for toys and games. Since COVID and there has been, it was happening anyway, which I think is interesting. Like you said, 2020 was a you know, game changer in people's acceptance, and then COVID happened, and it was kind of like a case of remote schooling. We need to be able to listen to kids reading and doing their language when they're at home. We need to be able to feed back to the kids, to the teachers when the kids are in the school and when they're home. And that acceleration, I think that was happening, that acceptance that was happening anyway in the market around voice technology being important. COVID just gave it a kick. And we're really seeing an acceleration, because a lot of people are sitting at home thinking and not flying around and sitting in meetings as well. So you've seen, I think, an awful lot of activity, a lot of reflection, a lot of people sitting at home, maybe using their voice technology systems. And I've seen a massive change, and I think you guys all have as well, in people's thinking and where we're at. And there's no going back, basically. You know, we've pushed forward a lot quicker than we would have otherwise. But yeah, 2021 is going to be really, really significant, I think.
Complete agreement. Julia, anything else to throw in there?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. 2020 has definitely been a push for voice assistant or voice technology in general, and it's going to be really exciting to see what's going to happen in 2021. I think one of the things that I find very exciting about it is also that the acceptance of using voice technology is a lot higher than it was before. I mean, voice technology has always been part of the ecosystem, well, not always, but in the last couple of years, part of the ecosystem, and been integrated in more and more solutions, and more apps have been developed, or services that integrate voice technology. But this year has definitely pushed it to a point where we didn't think we would be if COVID hadn't happened. I mean, we could probably all do without COVID, but in terms of pushing innovation and pushing voice technology forward, it's been a great year.
Complete agreement. Yeah. So we'll leave that right there, and we'll go to our last story, which is so we always like to include. I really like to include stuff that's bizarre or off the wall, but I didn't see anything this particular week. So we look for a one-off sort of thing that's not necessarily related to everything else, and we found it. So from Voicebot, and I want to read this: voice-activated museum, Planet Word, opens in DC. So I think this is cool. I think there's a few different ways to look at something like this. Phillip, I'm going to start with you, and then go to Trish, and then Julie, I'll give you the last word. Anything jump out to you about this? It's a bit of a one-off, directly related, indirectly related to what we're talking about. Your thoughts on this museum?
Well, I'll say that the Alvelda family is a sucker for a good museum. And I'm kind of bummed because we just moved from DC to the San Francisco area. So it's a long car ride to get to this one, and we're not flying just yet. So let me start there. I'd love to visit. I think the idea is fascinating. I've always been fascinated by the trends in linguistics. I mean, you hear stories about things like the decline of people's vocabulary as an example. Why is it that the works of Shakespeare hold so many more different words, more unique words than a typical work of fiction, and certainly a tweet stream. So we seem to be trending in directions of the loss of words and the loss of specificity and the loss of deep and rich meaning, or maybe expressing it in different ways. But I think having a museum to explore that and maybe illuminate and recover some of that beauty is time and energy well spent.
Is that true that Shakespearean works have a greater breadth of words and vocabulary than modern fiction?
It does seem to be, and certainly if you look at the trends where the average vocabulary has been declining quite a lot in the recent years, with a shift from reading long form fiction and nonfiction to reading shorter online segments. And then the predominance of press that's written purposefully at the 5th or 6th grade level to have broad appeal and broad uptake to drive ad revenue. You see the number of words in use declining.
Mm-hmm.
It's and you can see the differences in national approaches. So if you travel to London, for example, and just look at the advertisements on the tube. They have like 5-syllable words in garden variety ads. You never see that here. Why? Because they're targeted at a different demographic. They've got classes, and they're willing to market to the educated class. So I think building people's vocabulary is a good thing. Would love to see that kind of flourish.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Trish, your thoughts on this museum, and anything jump out at you about what Voicebot had to say?
I think this is quite an interesting take in that, museums of old were very passive. You sat there and absorbed, and then we've begun to get kind of museums that are interactive in terms of motion and maybe a little imaging. And this is really interesting because you are going to use your voice in a museum. Like, you're going to be expressive. And it's able to take words and create conversations, and it's going to have people have virtual conversations, have people, I think there was soundproof rooms and all that, but that's a very different thing, right? And there has been a push with, let's say, voice assistants and the likes with voice skills, so something that doesn't have a screen, where I just think this isn't a nice jump in that there's a lot of visual interactions, but it's going to create possibly a more immersive experience, being able to use your voice. And personally, I'm looking forward to the day when VR and AR starts to incorporate voice too, because then you're going to start having more real, natural interactions. And just like I was talking about before, like, voice is the natural interface. It's how humans communicate, but we also communicate visually, right? So, it's a certain amount is gesturing, a certain amount is visual, but using your voice more and more in interactive experiences are going to create more engaging experiences across the board. So I look forward to the day we see more of that. I think this is a nice start, and I'd love to visit.
Excellent. And Julie, I'm going to give you the last word. Any thoughts as you look at what these folks are doing with this museum? What do you think?
Yeah, actually, I've never been to Washington, D.C., so that has to be moved up on the bucket list. It sounds like a really interesting place to go, and I'm really excited, especially having a background in language. I agree actually with both Trish and Phillip. So I think it's very important to teach a little bit more about the broad variety of vocabulary and also teach the language, or the history of language. And one aspect that I find very fascinating about the museum is because you do use voice, and like I think you talked about that in episode 1 also, AI for kids and making sure that children understand how to use AI, and voice is definitely an important part of that. So I think this museum is not just teaching about language, about broader vocabulary, but also having an interactive and fun way to teach kids what you can all do with voice, how you can use it to learn something, and not just learn about language, but also about how to use voice to, for example, activate the different words about the history of English language. And the other aspect about it is that we're not just talking about the English language, but also about other languages, getting an understanding that there's a lot out there. There's a lot of languages that are rarely spoken still. Some of them are almost dying out. So I think that's also a fascinating aspect, that there's just an approach to help people, children, adults, everyone understand that language is something very fascinating, and it's different in every aspect and in every corner of the world. So I think it combines a lot of teaching moments.
Yeah, yes, it does, and that's a great place to leave it. Great conversation, Trish, Julia, Phillip. Appreciate all of y'all being generous with your time, being generous with your knowledge and your expertise, sharing them with not just me but the audience as well as part of This Week in Voice. Thank you for being part of the show.
Thanks, guys.
Yep, my pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
For This Week in Voice, Season 5, Episode 3. Thank you for listening, watching, if you're watching on YouTube. Until next time.